Hi my crafty friends, welcome to the Upcycle Design Lab. If this is your first time here, my name's Cindy and I craft using recycled and repurposed materials to give you ideas on ways to make and create more economically and ecologically. And today I'm going to be working on another aluminum can project. I'm making a faux calla lily plant for my garden because I seem to kill everything that I try to grow in this pot. But you could certainly make single calla lilies or make a bouquet of calla lilies to display indoors. So I'm going to take you through the process of making the calla lily and a couple of leaves, and then you can certainly decide how many you want to make. I think for my display I'm using about 16 cans total, but you can certainly make larger or smaller displays, whatever your preference is. The first thing is you need obviously to clean and wash your cans, and then you're going to cut them down so that you just have the wall of the can. And I'm not going to go through that process because I have done a full tutorial on how I break down the cans into the 4 parts that I use the most, and I will link to that video in the description. And I've also made a video on 3 different ways to flatten the cans into the flat sheets, so I will link to that process as well. And we're just going to jump right into this project with a flattened aluminum sheet. These are the templates that I used to make my calla lilies, and you can see that they're sized to fit on the aluminum sheet. If you visit my blog, which I will also link in the description box, you can download these for free to use. So I already have a few templates cut out here, and I'm just going to cut out a couple more leaves and 1 more calla lily shape. All you need to do this is a glue stick. You want to just glue in a couple of places to hold the template down. You don't want the paper to stick permanently to the aluminum. But one of the great things about this particular flower shape is that it is easy to cut with scissors. I've made several different flowers out of the aluminum cans, and they are a little bit more intricate to cut. You could still probably do it by hand, but for a lot of the other designs I recommend using a Cricut cutting machine. But like I said, what I like about this design is that it's such a simple shape that it's very easy to cut with a pair of scissors. So this should just kind of peel off. If it does stick, you can print out another template if you tear yours, but it should just come off if you don't let the glue harden too much, and then you can reuse it. And this is enough to make 1 calla lily shape. So I'm going to cut a couple more of the leaf shapes in the same fashion. Once all the leaves are cut, you want to go ahead and emboss a little bit of a pattern into them. And for these leaves, I decided just to emboss that center vein line. I'm using the small end of my embossing tool just to draw a crease into my leaf shape. And the next thing I want to do is I'm going to add a little bit of wire to each of my leaves. I just have some 22 gauge florist wire, and I've cut a couple of short pieces and kind of straightened them out. And I'm just going to use a little bit of my E6000 glue to glue the wires about 1/3 of the way up onto the leaf, right in that crease that I've drawn with my embossing tool. Once your E6000 glue has dried, you're ready for the next step. And for this step, you're going to want some Rust-Oleum Bright Copper Metallic spray paint, a little bit of painter's tape, and some metal aluminum tape. You can find this in any home improvement store. It's primarily used for taping metal duct work, but I have found it to be invaluable for crafting with aluminum cans. And for each calla lily, you're going to want about 8 or 9 inches of tape. And you can see my layout here for painting all of my pieces. I used the painter's tape just to secure my pieces so they wouldn't move around as I was spraying them with the copper spray paint. And I also sprayed some pieces of metal tape. You do want to spray both sides of the aluminum pieces, and you do want to be a little careful about not taping them down too securely because then they are hard to work with. Just a little bit of tape will hold them in place. I have a lot of different scrap wires that I can choose from, so I have some pretty heavy gauge copper wire. I have some wire that has some plastic the plastic case still on it. You can use regular florist wire, whatever is just a little bit stiff but still flexible. And I just chose the thicker wires because calla lilies kind of have thicker stems than a lot of other flowers. If you have any scrap wire, you can probably use that. You don't have to necessarily go out and buy new wire. I've cut my piece to the length that I want my flowers to be, and the next step is to take a piece of my metal tape about 3 inches long, and if you've never worked with this tape, it has a paper backing on it. It's very tacky. It's not a very strong tape, but it's a very sticky tape and a kind of a moldable tape because it is made from aluminum. And I just want to put this piece of tape kind of crinkled up about 2 inches from one end of my wire. So I'm just going to start about 2 inches, that 1.5 inches down, and kind of crumple up my tape. You want to cover the tip of your wire, but don't really worry about what it looks like too much. And I'm trying to keep the copper side mostly on the outside, and I'm just going to kind of wrap the tape carefully and loosely around my wire. And then once I have it completely wrapped around, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of smash it down until it looks like the center. I think they're called stamen. I don't know. I'm not a botanist, but is that what they're called? The inside of the flower here. And don't worry if some of the silver's showing. It should just look like this. You can make your calla lilies any color that you want, but my color palette is DecoArt Snow White, Avocado, and Primary Yellow. And to paint my pieces, I do a very lazy, sloppy job just using a paper towel and dabbing it into the paint. I like a little bit of the copper to show through, and as the paint dries, it does thin out a little bit. So if you think you're putting on too much paint, but you still have a little bit of copper showing, that should probably be a good amount of paint. So I'm just going to quickly add a little bit of color to that center stem that I just made. And this is a very fast way to paint, and I like it because I don't have to do a perfect job. And like I said, I like a little bit of the copper to show through. So once I have my pieces painted with the paper towel, I like to go around with my finger and just add a little bit of edging carefully to my painted pieces. Not pressing very hard, I'm just gently adding a little bit of an edge to my painted pieces. You can add a little or a lot, and you can add it to both sides or just one side. And if you're terrified of paper cuts, you can skip this step. The next step is to seal the paint, and I really like this DecoArt DuraClear gloss varnish. It also comes in a satin and a matte finish if you're not a shiny gloss person, and it's very easy to use. One of the reasons that I like it is that it's also rated to be used indoors and outdoors. So since I'm going to have my calla lily plant outside, I definitely want something that will hold up outdoors. This is a water-based sealer, and you can see it's a little bit creamy when it goes on, but it dries completely clear and shiny. And I have actually used it on some other projects that I've had outside, and it has held up pretty well. So I'll let my sealer dry and we'll be back to assemble the flowers. To shape the calla lily petal, I'm going to start by rolling it with my fingers. You can kind of bend the bottom piece, but you don't want to make any real folds in your shape. And once I've got it curled up with my fingers, I'm going to use my round-tipped jewelry pliers to just roll back the petal edge from about 1 inch up from the bottom and 1.5 inches from the tip. So I'm just going to be trying to curl about this much of the petal. And you just want to work kind of carefully and slowly and just gently roll back that edge. So I'm just going to repeat that on the other side. And once I've got my petal shaped, I'm going to take my stem and line everything up so that my tape piece on my stem is at the bottom of my petal. And I have a small strip of my metal tape, about 4 inches long, that I'm just going to use to attach the petal to my stem. So I want to pinch my petal closed, and I'm going to go about 3/4 of an inch up with and start my tape. And like I said, this tape isn't terribly strong, so what you want to do is just kind of make sure that you're making contact with your petal and also getting down on the stems so that you're holding the two pieces together. And then you can sort of gently reshape your flower a little bit. You can curl back the tip. And next I want to just make a piece to kind of cover up my sloppy tape. So I'm just cutting sort of a V shape. And making sort of a wavy edge, and then I'm just going to wrap this around my other piece of tape, and this goes up on the petal a little farther just to hold everything together. So I'm going to kind of line it up with my petal and then just gently wrap it around. It doesn't matter if it's gathering up a little bit. And if you want to, you can fill in that little spot. You don't have to. Actual calla lilies kind of have, sometimes this part is the petal color, sometimes there's a little bit of green coming up into the petal. It just depends on the flower and I think the maturity of it maybe. So I'm going to color this portion. I'm going to go back and color that green, but you could make it the color of your petal. And I'm going to go ahead and put a little green onto my stem as well, just to make everything sort of match and look a little more like greenery. And then once this is dry, I'll go back with my sealer and I'll just recoat the entire thing just to put a second coat on there and hopefully make it stand up a little bit better out in the weather. I think I mentioned earlier that the calla lilies have kind of thicker stems than a lot of flowers, and they actually have sort of a variety of widths of their stems. So I wanted to add some flowers that had thicker stems and some that were thinner, and to do that I have some tubing. It's a 1/4 inch tubing that was just left over from the hose for your, I think it's for our refrigerator that the water goes through to the refrigerator. And so I just spray painted a little bit of that as well, added some green paint and put a sealer coat on. And so for some of my flowers, I have a thicker stem by adding this tubing. And so I'm sliding that on, and then I'm putting my finishing piece on and adding the green paint and another sealing coat. So that just gives you a little more variety and a little more authentic looking calla lily. And if you want to, you can add a little piece to some of your leaves. I did that by just sliding it on the wire and attaching it with a little bit of E6000 glue at the top. And on some of my leaves, I just left the short wire or the skinny wires just for a variety. And of course, if you're going to have your flowers inside or you're just making a single flower, you can certainly wrap the stem with the florist tape instead of using the paint or the tubing. It's up to you how you want to finish off the stems of the calla lilies. That's it for today's project. If you enjoyed this content, please give this video a thumbs up. Also, if you haven't joined my YouTube family, I'd love to have you click that subscribe button. If you'd like to check out more upcycled projects, click one of the playlists below. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you back here soon in the lab for my next experiment.